That's the second time I got to hear our worship team sing those songs, and thank you. You're wonderful, really good. My wife and I have 2 children. Tiffany is 5.5, and Timmick is 2.5 years old. And many weeks, especially in the past, we would go to the park. We'd go to the park in the morning or in the afternoon, and the kids would play and have a lot of fun. And Paulina would talk to the women, I'd talk to the guys. And, we talk about sports, and we talk about the weather and how you doing. And oftentimes the guys would take out their phone and show me their kids. You know how, especially new parents can be with their kids. This is little Teresa doing this, and this is little Johnny. Oh, this is his first poop. Thank you. That's right. And this is this and this and this. Anyway, I was talking to one of the guys one day, and what? You want to see some pictures of my kids? No. That'd be a little obnoxious. Anyway, I was talking to one of the guys in the afternoon in the park, and he, what? Just a few? All right, well, just a few here. So these are my kids, our kids, riding their bikes to the park. And this is Tiffany at the park or on the way to the park. And this is Timmick at the park having fun. And this is Timmick when we have to go home. And this is me when he won't go home. So there you go. As I was saying, I got to talking, just figured out how to slide that in there, pun intended. I got to talking to some other dads, and oftentimes, we'll get around to it, and then here comes the question. Ready? So, what do you do for work? Now, whenever someone asks me something like that, I know it's the beginning of a conversation killer and social isolation. Usually they go, oh, and that's it. But surprisingly, this guy said, oh, and then he said, well, that's interesting. I used to go to church, and I used to believe in all that stuff, but I just don't have enough faith anymore. And in one of those moments where I kind of said the right thing at the right time, one of those rare moments, I said, well, you're in really good company. Because the first followers of Jesus, even after they spent 3 years with Jesus, at one point they came to the, not only did they have a little faith, they had no faith at all. So you're in really good company. There was no follow-up to that on his part. That was probably enough for him. Well, today is Easter Sunday, right? Today represents the foundation of our faith. All of our morals, all of our teaching, everything is founded on this event, whether it's true or not. Not Hallmark true, not oh butterflies true, not sentimental true, but really historically true. Our faith is founded on this event. And so this is what we believe, that a man named Jesus was buried on Friday evening about 6 o'clock at night, and he was dead. And he lay in the tomb Friday night for 6 hours, all day Saturday, Sunday morning for about 6 hours, and that he rose from the dead. And then on Sunday morning, before he rose from the dead, the disciples were all gathered around waiting for Jesus to come out. They were so excited. They were so filled with faith because they remembered that Jesus had told them, I'm going to die and rise from the dead. I'm going to die and rise from the dead. I'm going to die and rise from the dead. And so there they were, expectant, excitedly waiting for Jesus. Kind of like on New Year's Eve when the ball drops, 10, 9, 8, 7. That's not what happened. That's not what happened at all. They didn't go to the tomb. No one was waiting at the tomb. No one was excited. No one was counting down. Why? Listen, no one had any faith. The church thing was over. Following Jesus was over. He died. And dead people don't come back to life again. Well, it was early on Sunday morning when 2 women went to the tomb. They went to anoint the dead body of Jesus, I think because they just wanted to be near Jesus. And there they found the stone rolled away, and a couple of angels said he's risen, and they ran back. They told the disciples, and Peter and John ran to the tomb. They found it empty too, and then Jesus appears to all the disciples. And he stayed with them for 40 days. And when a dead person rises from the dead and hangs out with you for 40 days, that will help your faith. And the church became alive again because of the resurrection, because of this event. And that's why Peter, in his first sermon, he called it the fact. See, he didn't need any faith. They didn't need any faith because they saw it. They saw flesh and blood. We need some faith. Well, there's reasons for our faith. Faith is reasonable, but it is a reasonable trust. It is a step, but not into the dark. It is a step into the light. But they didn't call it faith. They didn't need faith. It was a fact for them because they had seen Jesus. The resurrection is an amazing story. If you believe it, it should change how you view death and dying. It should change how you live, because this life isn't all there is. And doesn't it go fast? Isn't it going fast? I think about big news stories in our lifetime today and how everybody kind of stops and celebrates them. I think of, before my time, the end of World War II was probably like that. The moon landing, the wedding of Charles and Diana, or the Berlin coming down, or more in our lifetime, I guess, or some of ours. The Super Bowl halftime shows. A lot of people don't watch the game so much, but the halftime shows, you got to see those commercials. Kind of like the whole world tunes in. Or FIFA World Cup finals. Or think about every New Year's Eve. The whole world kind of stops and watches the fireworks and that sort of thing. And so I often imagine, what would it be like if Jesus was living in our time and he died and he rose from the dead? I wonder how we would respond. I would wonder if we responded something like this.
Wait, hang on. All the way down here.
Dude, no way! I told you!
You're not gonna believe what just happened.
Long ago, this is what they felt like when it happened. And today, it's how we should feel too. Because what it meant for them, it means for us.
Now, the disciples eventually got there. They eventually were filled with excitement, but it took them a while, because each of the disciples had a barrier to belief. They each had something to overcome. And I'm wondering now if you'll engage with me for the rest of this teaching about where you are in your life and in your understanding of faith. I'm wondering if you will engage me and ask yourself, well, what are my barriers to belief to following Jesus more fully, or following him for the first time? There are 4 barriers that I want to look at in this story. First, there was a woman named Mary. Mary, as you know, went to the tomb early on Sunday morning, and when she got there, there was no body. That the tomb was empty, and she was in despair. She was overwhelmed with grief, and she ran back to tell the disciples, and the gospel writer John wrote these words that Mary said: "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know. We have no idea where they put him." And so she's overwhelmed with grief. She's overcome with sadness. She's numb with pain, and so she stands outside the tomb sobbing. And then Jesus shows up, and she doesn't realize it's Jesus. And John writes this. Jesus says to her, "Why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" And I love this. John puts in, thinking he was the gardener. She said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will get him." And Jesus says, "Mary," her name. She turned towards him and cried in Aramaic, "Rabboni, Rabboni." You see, the barrier for Mary, at least this one, she couldn't see Jesus because of her despair. She couldn't see Jesus because of her grief. Grief can callous our hearts so we can't feel. Sadness can blind our eyes so we can't see. Life's burdens can close our minds so we can't think. Have you ever been there? Mary, are you here this morning? Is some sadness in your life, something overwhelming in the past or present right now, just keeping you calloused and away from the risen Jesus? It can do that. What we learn from this encounter is that even in those times of grief, when we can't see Jesus, when we think he's the gardener, he shows up. He's there. He's present. And all throughout the scriptures, the answer to grief and suffering and sadness, there are some answers. There are some answers. There are reasons why bombs fall and cancer comes. There are reasons why marriages split apart and why there's so much hatred. There are some reasons, but the main answer is the answer that Mary got that morning, and that is presence. That is presence in the midst of her pain, and that's what Mary got. Mary, are you here this morning? Is that a barrier for you? Well, there's a second person in the Easter story that I want us to think about, and that's Peter. On that last Friday, before Jesus was arrested, Jesus was in the room with them, and they were having the Last Supper, and Jesus said to his disciples, he said, "Hey, just want you guys to know I'm going to die, but I'll rise from the dead, and you're all going to betray me." And it was Peter that stood up and said, not me. I'm your man. I'm Peter the Rock. Remember, you named me. These other guys might not stand. The implication is they're all going to fall away, but not me. I will not betray you. And then a little while later in that evening, a teenage or a preteen girl asked him, "Aren't you a disciple? Aren't you a disciple?" And Peter said, "No, no, no." And when he realized that he had betrayed Jesus, when he realized that he was the one, the gospel writer Luke writes this about Peter, that Peter went outside and wept bitterly. Bitterly. Peter wept because he felt like such a failure. Guilt was his barrier. He felt so guilty that he denied his Lord. He felt so guilty that he thought he was so strong and yet found out he was so weak. Peter, are you here this morning? Is there something in your life that's just, you're so ashamed of, feel so guilty about, that you feel like you don't belong in the company of Jesus? You don't belong here? Something you said, something you did, something past. But what Peter got was grace in his guilt, and that's what you and I can get. Instead of walking in guilt, we can walk in grace. That's what resurrection hope is. It doesn't matter what you've done, what you're doing, what you've thought, what you're thinking. It does not matter. Some people say, I'm not good enough to come to church. You don't know the church. You don't know me. You project onto me holiness. And you know that's not true. Peter, are you here? See, Mary needed presence in the midst of pain, and Peter needed grace in the midst of his guilt to overcome these barriers. There's another group of people I'd like us to think about, and that's the disciples. And the disciples needed courage in their fear. It was fear that kept them from experiencing resurrection hope, resurrection life. John records it this way. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear, fear was keeping them in that room. Fear was keeping the door locked because they were afraid of the Jews. Jesus came and stood among them and said, and I love this, he doesn't say, "What are you doing here?" He doesn't get in their face and say, "Come on, you have little faith. Remember I told you this would happen over and over and over. Come on." He doesn't say that. He says, "Peace. Peace. Shalom. Shalom. May it be well with you and your soul, even when it's not well out in the world. Peace." And after he said this, he showed them his hands. Why? Because they needed evidence, and we need evidence. Faith is not this blind leap. Faith is also not 100%. They had 100%. That's why they called it the fact. But faith for us is kind of like this. There's evidence. There are reasons to believe, but there's also mystery. There's meaning, and there's mystery. He showed them his hands and his side, and the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said peace twice. They needed it twice and more. He says, "As the Father has sent me, so I'm sending you." I'm not revoking my call for you to be salt of the earth and the light of the world. I can still use you. I'm not going to waste a resurrection on you. No. As imperfect and as unfaithful and as fearful as you are, you're it. The disciples are behind locked doors because of fear. Is fear a barrier for you? When the Holy Spirit came upon them after Jesus ascended, the fearful ones turned into courageous, faithful ones. Peter, who couldn't share his faith with a preteen girl, would stand up in front of people that crucified Jesus and say, "Hey, you killed the one you've been learning about in Sunday school all your life, the Messiah. He came and you killed him." Another disciple, once fearful, named Stephen, he stood up and proclaimed the good news and was stoned to death. Peter was encouraged. The disciples, are you here? Is there a door that you've locked because of fear? What do you fear in becoming a follower of Jesus? What do you fear in following him more and more in your life? From what fears do you need to be freed? I had lots of fears before I became a follower of Jesus. I was intellectually convinced for about 4 years before I kind of handed over my key to the locked doors. I knew I needed Jesus to lead my life. I knew I needed someone to forgive me of my sin. I knew I needed my guilt covered with grace. I knew I needed strength to say yes and no, but what if I became a follower of Jesus? Would there be no more fun? Would there be no more laughter? Would I have to spend hours in Bible study and prayer and singing and being, no offense, kind of weird? What would Jesus do with my desire to be successful and climb the ladder of ambition? What would Jesus do with my friendships? Would I have to make all new friends? Would I have to start saying religious phrases like praise the Lord and blessings and amen? Would I have to start calling people I didn't like brother and sister? What would he do with I'm Bunny? Would I have to give it to the church? And how much? And would I have to get rid of my rock and roll albums like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Steely Dan, and Boston? No. What if he called me to be a missionary to some small village in the Central African Republic? Or what if he called me to live my life among the poor? Or horror of horrors, what if he called me to be a pastor? See, I had all these fears that were barriers to belief, and they're real. And when you follow Jesus, he helps you slowly sometimes overcome those barriers of fear and guilt and remorse. Mary needed presence to overcome her pain. Peter needed forgiveness to overcome his guilt. The disciples needed strength to overcome their fear. See, this happened so long ago, but human nature doesn't change, does it? You have fears, I have fears. You have guilt, I have guilt. You need strength, I need strength. One last person, Thomas. When you think of Thomas, what nickname does he have? What nickname does he have? bummer of a nickname for Thomas. 2,000 years ago, and Thomas shows up. Oh, you're doubting, aren't you? But look at the story again. Thomas indeed doubted. Thomas had followed Jesus for 3 years. He believed in the mission. He believed in the person. Thomas believed he was the one until Jesus was crucified and died and buried. And when Jesus died, Thomas's faith died with it. And the disciples are together, as we just saw. Jesus shows up, but you know who's not there? Thomas. He's gone AWOL. He's not coming back to church. He bought it the first time. He's not buying it this time. Too many doubts. He got burned. So the disciples, after they've seen Jesus, they run to Jesus. They run to Thomas, and Thomas, they say this to Thomas: "We've seen him. We've seen him." Thomas says, Look what he says. Thomas says, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were." That'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it? You know? And put my, thank you, Dominic. And put my hand in your side. Ooh. "Unless I do that," Thomas says, "I will not believe. I'm not going to trust again. I'm not going to follow unless I do that." A week goes by. The disciples are gathered together. Thomas is with them this time, but I bet he's sitting in the corner of the room all the way in the back like, Jesus shows up. And what does Jesus say to Thomas? He says, "Peace. Peace." Don't you love the grace of God? Peace. Peace be with you. And then Jesus speaks these words to Thomas. Put your finger here. You need evidence? Put your finger here. You need evidence? Reach your hand and put it in my side. And then he says, stop doubting and believe. Stop doubting and believe. And what's Thomas say? My Lord and my God. That is the greatest faith statement by any one of the disciples. Peter's close with, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." But the doubting one is really the believing one. So whenever anyone says doubting Thomas, you can go in your mind, he's really believing Thomas. And check this out. His doubt caused him to be the biggest believer. It's not doubts that trip us up in following Jesus. It's how we handle those doubts. Most people just dismiss them. The resurrection can't be true. This stuff can't be true. It just can't be true. Just can't be true. Really? Follow the evidence. Yeah, there's mystery, but there are reasonable reasons to believe in a literal resurrection from the dead. And wouldn't that change everything? Wouldn't that change how you approach death? Wouldn't that change how you live? Peter, are you here this morning? Mary received presence in the midst of pain. Peter received grace in the midst of guilt. The disciples received courage in the midst of their cowardice. And Thomas received evidence. My understanding is that you will get what you need to become a follower of Jesus when you pursue him. When you pursue him. He pursues you. He's pursuing you now. He pursues you in the creation without, in your conscience within. He pursues you through the church, people. He pursues you through circumstances. He pursues you, but then he gives you the choice. And that's what I love what Jesus said, and I'll end with this. When Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, he said these words. He said, "I am the resurrection." Can you imagine someone saying that? "I am the resurrection and the life, and whoever believes in me." Believes means to trust. Believe means to follow. Believe means to listen to what he says and do it. And whoever, Grace, whoever believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. What? And whoever believes in me, even though you die, will live? What? And then the question. See, he will not force your faith. He will not force you to trust him more and more. He will not force you to follow him more and more. And he will not force you to follow him for the first time. Because true love doesn't force, it gives the opportunity to choose. And so we ask the question, do you believe this? Are you hearing this morning? Do you believe this? What are your barriers to belief? Do you believe this? Oh God, we thank you for your love. We thank you that you pursue us just as you pursued Mary and Peter and the disciples and Thomas and me and us. Help us to see you, Lord. Help us to see you not as the gardener. Help us to see the living Jesus. And may we trust you with our lives, with our children, with our grandchildren, with our health, with our world. Help us to trust you and take one step at a time. This is a beautiful day. All around the world, the proclamation is that you are alive. It's a glorious day. Do you believe this? Jesus asks. Amen.